everyone present here and also those who are joining us through the live streaming on CEFIPRA YouTube channel. It gives me immense pleasure to share that this year IIFT completes 60 glorious years of its existence. As part of the Diamond Jubilee Year celebration, today IIFT has arranged for a public lecture on regulating tech giants by none other than Professor Jean Tirole, who has been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2014 for his analysis of market power and regulation. I extend a very warm welcome to you, Professor Tirole, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Manoj Pant, dignitaries from French Embassy in India, Department of Science and Technology, other invited guests, members from the media, my faculty colleagues, and our dear students. Today's lecture has been organized under the aegis of Indo-French Centre for the Promotion of Advanced Research, also known as CEFIPRA, as part of their annual lecture series, which intends to increase the interaction of best academics around the world with young students and researchers. We are honored that Professor Tirole has kindly agreed to deliver the lecture today, and indeed grateful to him for gracing IIFT as part of our Diamond Jubilee Year celebration. Now I would request our Vice Chancellor, Professor Manoj Pant, to felicitate Professor Tirole with a book and a shawl. May I now request Professor Pant to introduce Professor Tirole to the audience and deliver the welcome address. Yeah, from here, sir.
We are delighted to have Professor Tirole with us. And as you know, most of you are students in Faculty of Economics. And as he said in his hour-long or so lecture, which he left open-ended, you are free at the end of it to have some questions. Stick to the policy issue, don't delve into areas of politics which is not of interest to him at the moment. Now, just to remind a lot of you, you know, the failure of the market was something indicated. Most of you are technical people. Way back in '57, Coopmans and Beckman, the famous paper on assignment problem, showed in the area of location that a free market will not be an efficient allocator of resources wherever they are indivisible. But Nash said the same thing, right? If people don't agree on something, you won't get any market to give you an assignment. Now, here's what Professor Tirole did, and I don't need to tell you more about him, you should all know. If you don't, you shouldn't be here in the first place. But he brought together game theory and asymmetric information, two areas, and literally started this area called industrial organization, which said, if you want to look at markets which are not perfect, you need to look at some new models. And why is this so important? Because the availability of indivisible or monopolistically controlled resources is inalienable to a government. Every government does it. And you need to be able to figure out what rules do I follow? There's no one size which fits all. It depends on the nature of the monopoly, where it is, etc., which we will learn more about today. His career is very interesting, and I think it shows how he ended up in this area. He began with engineering, and then he got I think, distinguished fields PhD in mathematics, and then he got interested in economics. And before that, he was a civil servant. Unfortunately, today civil servants aren't here. Today is their day of meetings or whatever. But he began, and therefore he got into the issue of how does government actually handle this technical problem? You have a resource which you control. Now, if you give the price, if your price is too low, then you'll have adverse selection. No one will come. If your price is too high, the consumers lose. How do you do this? And of course, all of you know the famous two models. the fixed price model and the cost plus model. Now, it seems so obvious that in perfect competition both deliver the same incentives, but actually in reality they don't. And so a series of work he has done that. And as I said, I believe he was the one who instituted the area of industrial organization, which is taught, which is taught almost everywhere, is a major subject of interest in economics all over the way. And that's all I want to say. And we are very glad that you are with us today, Professor Tirole. I look forward to your lecture. Please.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chancellor, Professor Pound, and thank you also to Professor Gosh for those kind words. And I'm very happy to be here for multiple reasons, to be meeting with you and actually also representing the excellence of, I hope, the excellence of France. We do have now a number of top institutions in the field of economics in France. And that's very important. That didn't used to be the case. Now we do have them. And there are many which can now accommodate you if you want to come to France at some point, including my own institution, the Toulouse School of Economics, and the Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse, which is a pluridisciplinary institute which includes other social sciences. And we are very eager actually to get bright young minds to come to our place. So it has been for a long time now. The programs have been in English at the master level, at the PhD level, and some of our courses at the undergraduate level are in English as well. So we are very, very keen also, and I'm looking forward to the discussion we are going to have today. So I'm going to give a lecture, but I also want to have an exchange with you and a Q&A. I also want to thank CEFIPRA for organizing this visit and making this happen. So it's a very big honor for me both to visit the IIFT and thank you for your welcome, Mr. Vice Chancellor, but also just having the pleasure of meeting you. So let me take this. It's going to be a bit warm otherwise, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. It's all yours.
Thank you. To the clicker. Sorry. Oh, it's there. Okay, thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a topic which is industrial organization, and there are many other things we could be discussing, of course, but it's a topic which is very big now in many countries. I'm not that familiar with India, actually, with the antitrust part in India, and I apologize for that, but the regulation of tech giants I know is also being considered in India, and we could exchange on what you are doing. It's a big thing because now the tech industry is very big. It's very concentrated both in terms of market structure, but also in terms of countries. If you look at the 10 top companies, tech companies in the world, they are American or Chinese, and they are very powerful, incredibly powerful. And we have to think about how to actually promote competition while at the same time keeping the innovation, because those companies, they can be very dangerous, but at the same time they also produce incredibly useful products, and we have to think about how to make the two compatible. So competition policy is at a crossroad. That has always been the case since late 19th century, that we are no friend of big monopolies. Sometimes they are deserved. I mean, sometimes they are monopolies for a good reason because they have innovated. But once they are entrenched, they can charge very high prices, and they can innovate little because they are afraid of cannibalizing their own products. So the rate of innovation may decrease if you have monopolies. Now, what we have also observed in the last 10, 15 years is a very huge increase in markups of prices above cost. And there are lots of people like John van Reenen and others who have documented this increase in markups. But I would say that the concern about market power is not that new. When I grew up, as an economist, which is when I was at your place, in a sense, there were three areas in this organization. The first was regulation of utilities, what the Vice Chancellor talked about, of network industries or natural monopolies, so telecoms, electricity, railroads, and so on. Then there was competition policy, which was where you didn't have a sectoral regulator, but you had antitrust authorities in charge of keeping competition in all those industries. And then you had industrial policy, which was not taught, certainly not at MIT, but nowhere else, more or less, because people saw that the state was not as good at doing industrial policy, at picking winners. Now it's making a timid comeback, and I'm not going to talk about it. I think industrial policy can be useful if it's done right, but most often it's done wrong, and you have to do it right. I'm going to ignore that for the moment. But there are lots of, because we have lots to do with those platforms, so the Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and so on of this world, Booking, and that's something that they have very specific, they have specificities like network externalities. They can be direct or indirect. So I may be on Facebook because you are on Facebook. Or it may be an indirect because, if I belong to a big network, then there will be more applications. So if you're Apple or your Android, your iOS or your Android, of course you have lots of applications to play with. So there are big network externalities, there are big investments also, and they look like natural monopolies. So they look a little bit like the telecom industry in the old time, or the railroad, or the post office, or the electricity industries, with very high fixed cost and very low marginal cost. Actually, in the case of the digital economy, its marginal costs are mostly zero. The marginal cost of production is zero. So in a sense, they look like public utilities, and they can charge high prices, and actually they do now. If you think about Google and Facebook, also Facebook has had a little bit of trouble lately, but if you think about it, they can charge a lot. So not to consumers, because consumers, we benefit from all those wonderful services for free. We never pay anything. But of course, there's a catch, which is the other side of the market. The merchants who want to sell on the platform, the advertisers who want to advertise on the platform, they are going to pay a lot. And in the end, it's the consumer who's going to pay, because that raises the cost of doing business. So the high prices are not directly on you and me. They are indirectly on you and me, because the merchants and the advertisers will be paying a lot. So that has raised a question about whether we should actually regulate those platforms like traditional utilities. And my answer is no. I don't see why we should be regulating as public utilities, for two reasons. Because it's true they are very similar in terms of the cost structure, very low marginal cost, very high fixed cost, network externalities. But at the same time, there are two big differences with the public utilities. The first difference is that Google and Amazon and all those firms are actually now, or Tencent and Alibaba or whatever, they are now global firms, whereas almost everywhere the public utilities were domestic firms, which meant that the domestic regulator had all the information about the firm itself. So it was auditing all accounts, and it was the only entity in charge of making sure that there was some kind of fair rate of return. That's not possible because now those countries are, those firms are in different countries, and of course there's a lot of transfer pricing between the countries, and that's very difficult to regulate because you have so many different regulators who are in charge, unless they cooperate sufficiently. The second thing which is different is that the technology changes very fast. So think about railroads or electricity. The technology hasn't changed that much, at least in the broad lines, since the 19th century. But of course, with tech, things change all the time. And that means in particular that even Google or Amazon, we haven't followed Google and Amazon along the life cycle. We have actually caught up with them only when they were big. And that raises the issue about what is the rate of return. Many of those firms are highly unprofitable for a long time, and then they are highly profitable. So what is the rate of return, intertemporal rate of return? And what is the probability that they would have succeeded? So what was the probability of Google becoming Google in a sense? You know, it's actually a difficult issue. So we don't know how to do it. We cannot just apply the kind of regulation that Jean-Jacques Lafont and I in Toulouse developed in the past. We cannot apply that to the tech industry. So here's a simplified diagram. I mean, you're going to say it's a bit messy, but it's actually highly simplified. And try to tell you a little bit about this ecosystem, the two-sided ecosystems, which in Toulouse, I'm sorry, I'm always advertising Toulouse, but I hope some of you will be coming to Toulouse at some point. You know, we developed the theory of two-sided markets with Jean-Charles Rocher, who is also a Toulouse faculty, but also with Patrick Ray and Jean-Jacques Lafont. And you know, we did that because it has its specificities. You know, if you want to think about antitrust, it has its specificities. So the big thing is that you have a platform. And the difficult thing, of course, is that this platform in the literature has many different names. So, for example, in European regulation, it's called the core services, or some core, it's linked with the core. But in the old time, you would have called that an essential facility or a natural monopoly. And there are many other names that are used, a bottleneck, and so on and so forth. So you have this platform sitting in the middle, and basically connecting two sides who want to interact with each other. So on the one side, there's a consumer. Okay, so I don't know where. Okay, on one side, there's the consumers who actually, that's you and me. So we're on Google, we're using YouTube and Google search and so on and so forth. And on the other side, there are apps or merchants. Okay, so, and you know, we want to interact with the merchant, the apps and merchants want to interact with us. And basically, the core is in between. If you think about it, that raises three different kind of issues. By the way, for the apps and merchants, I wrote, you know, a coexistence between an internal app or merchant, an in-house one, and a third-party external one. But in general, there could be as many as you want, of course. And those apps compete among each other. So for each app segment, and here I have only one app segment, but in general, there are many app segments there. There are thousands of applications or thousands of merchant segments which compete with each, within each segment there is competition. So I was saying there are three different type of issues, and some I'm not going to develop, which are actually very interesting to discuss. So on the consumer side, there is a concern about behavioral manipulations. You know, I told you about social sciences more broadly, and you know, those platforms, they are extremely good psychologists in a sense. They are very good at playing with our cognitive mistakes and our cognitive failures, our motivated beliefs and so on. Something I won't have time to develop, but it's very important. There are also issues about whether when they make recommendations, whether they make recommendations which are good for you or good for them. You know, they might have biases over it. They might recommend their own apps, for example. Or they might recommend a third-party apps which leaves them a big commission. And that may not be the best for you. So there are both behavioral manipulation and informational issues, and they have been addressed. Here I'm just going to give you what is being done in the European Union. but there are similar things that now are being done in the US. Actually, the European Union, we are a bit leader in that area. We are moving faster, and in terms of selection of recommendation, behavioral content curation. As you know, content curation, again, all kinds of conspiracy theories, hate speech, misrepresentation, and so on, is actually hate speech I've mentioned, is actually extremely important. I'm not going to discuss that. Then there is the issue of contestability. So for those of you who don't know about contestability, that really means that you would like the next Google to be able to enter and be actually replacing Google. If it's actually more efficient than Google, then it should be able to replace Google. So contestability of the core segment, so basically the platform could be replaced by the next efficient platform. And then there is the issue about competition in the app or merchant segment. Is that fair competition? And there are two sub-branches for that. One is there a level playing field between the in-house apps and third-party apps, the external apps? And also, even if there is a level playing field, the question is the commission which is being paid by the third-party apps or merchants or advisors, for that matter, is that a fair competition? Is that a fair level? So, many app stores, for example, are going to charge 30% commission. They're going to charge 30% commission for the apps on the App Store. Booking I don't know if you have Booking in India. Yeah, so Booking, for example, might charge, it depends on the country, but might charge 20% to the hotel. That might be the case. There are big cases with payment cards, PayPal and all the wallets, or American Express will charge, say, 3%, Visa and MasterCard a bit less, but there are big debates about whether Amazon will charge about 15% in the West. I don't know about how much Amazon will charge in India, but there are questions about, is that the right level? You understand they have to charge, that's reasonable, but how much? So that's something we're going to discuss today. In the European Union, we have the DMA, which is the Digital Market Act, which talks about both contestability and the access issue. Okay? So let me start with contestability, because I'm going to be very brief on that, but it's important as well. I will focus more on the access issue because we have only an hour. We could be spending 5 hours on that, but I have to pick my fights. Okay, so contestability, I told you it must be the case that a new platform which will be more efficient than Amazon or more efficient than Facebook or more efficient than Google be able to actually enter and replace the incumbent. But there are a number of issues. It may not be able to enter. It may face what's called the application barriers to entry. So the application barriers to entry means that you don't have enough applications to play with. Okay? So imagine you want to replace Apple, but you don't have the App Store, you don't have as many merchants, as many applications. That would be very difficult. And if the dominant platforms integrate too much into the merchant segment or the app segment, then that means that a number of applications or a number of merchants will not be available for the competing platforms. Okay? So that's going to say we have to pay a little bit attention when those platforms integrate vertically into the app or merchant markets, because that might help them actually foreclose access to those apps and merchants for replacing platform. It might that's more specific to Facebook, but social networks, it might the install base to produce network externalities. So that has been known for a long time. If you have network externalities, it's very difficult for an entrant to replace the incumbent because there is a coordination issue. Are you going to switch right away? And is everybody going to coordinate to switch to the rival social network, for example? Then there is the issue about the possibility that there are potential platforms which may be foreclosed. So you are too young to remember the Microsoft case, but Microsoft was dominant in the Windows segment, okay, and that was in the 90s. And the dominant browser was called Netscape at the time. It has become an open source software since, and we could discuss that. It's actually very interesting. But you know, it was a Netscape. It was a dominant browser. But then Microsoft introduced Internet Explorer as an alternative browser, and there were disputes, complicated disputes about whether Netscape had equal access, etc. Let's not discuss that. It's a bit technical. But both parties agreed that at the start, Netscape was a complement, and that's going to be important for what follows. Netscape was a complement to Windows because it brought the browsers, and that made Windows even more valuable because it could be used for browsing as well, thanks to Netscape. But Microsoft was a bit worried about Netscape actually not staying a complement but becoming a substitute to Windows, by adding lines of code, which would have made it a competitor and creating its own APIs, application programming interfaces, and that would have been an issue. I don't want to assess a case, but the big case was that actually Netscape could have actually, instead of being a complement to Windows, might in the long term have replaced Windows. Okay? And that might be, it might not have been able to enter because it needed to connect and have customers in the first place. But finally, it may be the case that a rival may actually be able to enter but not yet enter. And that's a nascent literature on defensive merger. And I'm going to come back to that. So let me tell you a little bit what's happening on that front, for example, for the DMA in Europe, but the US has a similar legislation in preparation. So I already said, there is this view, which is not a new view, that the dominant platform should not tie the core services and other services, so as not to basically eliminate third-party apps in the competition. One of the things that antitrust authorities emphasize is multi-homing. Multi-homing, actually, I'm afraid that's a word we created more or less in Toulouse, but multi-homing is basically the possibility for you and I to connect to multiple platforms. Okay, we do that when you have multiple payment cards in your pocket, for example. Or if you are both on Windows and Linux, for example, you are multi-homing. But conversely, if you think about the apps, which there are zillions of apps on say iOS and Android, for example, and the biggest one, not the smallest one, but the biggest one often multi-home on the two, which actually preserve the possibility for iOS and Android to coexist. Otherwise, there might be a single operating system for phones, and that's very important because again the ecosystem is very important. But multi-homing is encouraged by the law. Okay, let me give you it's very abstract, but let me give you an example. In the US, you basically have two platforms for basically taxi platforms, digital taxi platforms. They're called Uber. You have Uber here in India, and the other one is Lyft in India. You have another one, but you have Uber and Lyft. Okay, now the drivers can be on both. And you as a consumer, you can also be on both. And that's actually very, very important. Even so, Uber is actually stronger than Lyft, but it's very, very important to keep the competition. Imagine that Uber were to say, you drivers, if you want to work with Uber, you are not allowed to work with Lyft. So Uber could ask exclusivity from the drivers. Then what will happen? Uber has more customers. Basically, the drivers will probably choose Uber. So there will be very few taxis on Lyft. And therefore, consumers will choose Uber as well. So the consumers will not even use Lyft. So, you know, there will be some kind of snowballing. I mean, there's some feedback loop which will actually lead to a monopoly of Uber. Lyft would disappear if you had exclusivity. But that's true more generally. So basically, there are a bunch, and then it gets a bit technical, but there are a bunch of policies in the European law which actually encourage multi-roaming. Okay? I'm not going to discuss those in detail. It will take too much time. There is a push for interoperability. That's mostly for social networks. So we have a quasi-monopoly of Facebook, all the more that Facebook has purchased WhatsApp and Instagram. We will come back to that. But we want the next Facebook, more efficient Facebook, actually to be able to enter. But that's very difficult because of the network study. Again, if we are all on Facebook and a better network comes in, how do we coordinate to move to the other network? And there are several issues. One, first, we already have our content. We have posted lots of material. We have our pictures and friends and also and things like that on Facebook. So do we want to leave Facebook? Well, it's not that clear. And also, we may want to try the other network. We may or may not like it. Now, for that, you must, for the transition to be kind of smooth, you need to have actually the ability to port your material very easily, both in a static way. So, which you might want to take your picture and so on, and your contact list to the other network, but you also want to do it in a dynamic way, because in the short run you will prefer multi-homing. You don't know whether you're going to like the new network. You don't know whether your friends are going to be on the new network. So you would like to do multi-homing at least in the transition. And when you post a new picture, you don't want to have to post it on two networks. Every time you interact, you really want to be able to do it in a smooth way. So that raises the issue of APIs and so on. There is a more controversial thing in the European law, which basically says you should not be combining data from different services or obtained from third parties, which of course all the platforms violate right now. I mean, if you think about Google, Google is collecting a lot of information, including from third-party apps. They're sharing the data with third-party apps, but then Google is going to take data from YouTube, is going to take data from Google Mail, from Gmail, from your search, of course, from all your searches. And some of that is efficient because that allows Google actually to know you better and actually offer you services which are better suited to your own taste. However, the issue is that that makes Google even more dominant. But if we prevent Google from using data from various sources, then it's also going to make Google a little bit less efficient, and there's a cost of regulation there. Okay, I mentioned defensive mergers, and the current review system is broken, okay? It has to be changed. So the current review system basically says two things. First, in order for the competition authority to review a merger, it must have a certain size. And in particular, if one of the merging parties is very small, it will not be investigated. Okay? I will come back to that. And then the competition authority has the burden of proof to prove that the merger is anti-competitive. Now, you see more and more, but we don't have enough evidence, and maybe you'll bring more evidence on that, that you see platforms engaging in what we call defensive acquisition or preemption. So basically buying third-party apps or merchants before they have regrown. Okay, so I was mentioning earlier Facebook acquiring WhatsApp and Instagram. Now, at the time, WhatsApp and Instagram hardly existed. I mean, they had the technology, they had the ID and so on, but their sales were very small, their profits were highly negative. And they could not, first, they were too small actually they fell under the radar of the competition authority, so they didn't pursue those acquisitions. And then you could not have proved that they were substitutes or complement to Facebook. It was impossible. There was no data yet. And that's really an issue because WhatsApp and Instagram are social networks and they had the potential to compete with Facebook. Now, we didn't know. Nobody actually knows whether they would have competed with Facebook. It's impossible to tell. But they were potential competitors for Facebook. So the question I have is really why is that I mean, WhatsApp and Instagram could have been purchased by Microsoft, for example, or by somebody else, or it could have gone through an IPO. And it didn't. It was purchased by Facebook. And there was nothing, actually, the European and American competition authority looked at that, but they said, we cannot do anything. There was no way we could do anything with that. Okay, and it's exposed, you cannot undo the mergers as easily because, the two becomes, I mean, the technology and so on, the data are becoming intertwined. So it's hard actually to unscramble the eggs. It's much easier not to start the omelette first. So, that's that thing. So my own recommendation, and that's something which we are heading towards, is basically when you are suspicious about, if you take the Facebook acquisition of WhatsApp and Instagram, is really to put the burden of proof on dominant platforms and not on the other. By the way, there is some empirical work in pharmaceutical, which I'm citing here, showing some defensive acquisition. It's a little bit easier because you can look at the similarity between molecules and see whether you have sometimes the firm purchases a molecule and actually throws it away, doesn't develop it. I mean, there could be other reasons for that, but there is some empirical evidence which is actually quite interesting that might be a defensive merge. Okay. So, there are efficiency defenses. By the way, if you ask Google or Facebook and all those firms, are you right in doing that and engaging in those defensive mergers? They will say, they are not defensive mergers. We are purchasing talent. I think it's nonsense. Because sure, they are purchasing talent. It's important for those firms actually to purchase talent, and that's perfectly fine. But why Facebook buying WhatsApp and Instagram? Again, it could have been purchased by another tech company. They will also say we are destroying the exit mechanism. There are two ways for startups to exit for venture capitalists and for entrepreneurs. One is an IPO, an initial public offering, but actually the most common one is to sell to a big buyer, to a big firm. And you say, if you're not allowed to sell to a big firm, then you are killing one of the exit mechanisms. But that's, again, doesn't make much sense because WhatsApp and Instagram could have been sold to Microsoft or somebody else. There are other arguments I'm not going to go into, but I think we have to look at that in more detail. Let me see. I don't know how much time I still have. It's okay. because that's something I really want to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about fairness. So now I'm no longer looking at the contestability between the contestability of the core segment, the kind of natural monopoly segment. I'm looking at the apps and the merchants. Now, as an introduction, there are many shades of openness of platforms. You have what I will call pure brokers. They only have third-party apps or merchants. They are not present in the complementary segment. So if you think about actually Booking or Airbnb, you have Airbnb in India too? Yes. So Airbnb doesn't own the rental places. You know, it's a pure broker. Airbnb is just making the transaction between the consumer and the owner feasible. It's an online marketplace, but it's not. Now, at the other extreme, you have vertical integration where, you know, for example, Apple will produce its own hardware. You know, Apple is a software company, but it's also producing, you know, the computer, the iPhone, and all those things. So it's more integrated traditionally than say, for example, Windows was or Microsoft was. And you see that today also. Android is a bit more open than Apple iOS. But you know, most of the action is taking place in between, what we call co-petition. So if you think about Amazon Marketplace, for example, you have Amazon Basics, you have a number of products of Amazon, but you also have lots of third-party products. Or if you want to buy food in the US, you can get from third-party providers, or you can get from Whole Foods, which is actually owned by Amazon. Okay? So, you know, the question is, why don't you have pure brokers? And there are various reasons for that. You know, serendipitous innovations that are made by the platforms or in this complementary segment. You can better control consumer experience by having a seamless operation. But of course, what we economists are interested in is mainly anti-competitive behavior. So that's the picture, and that's what we're going to be interested in, this competition. So that's why I'm putting back this diagram. I hope by now you have assimilated the diagram. And just to tell you what we are worried about. So what we are worried about is the level playing field between the third-party merchants and the in-house merchants or the apps. Okay? Now, there's a school of thought that you probably know, which is a Chicago school of thought, which in the 60s, 70s, and 80s has a huge influence on judges and lawyers and antitrust authorities, and which basically said, at the time people were not thinking about two-sided platforms, so I'm changing their formulation, adjusted for two-sided platform, but basically saying the following. If the platform excludes some rivals on the complementary segment, so excludes those third-party apps, that's for efficiency reason. And how do we know it's for efficiency? And therefore, there is nothing to be worried about, because a rich ecosystem allows a platform to raise price on the core service. Okay? So self-preferencing, by the way, in the old parlance was called foreclosure or exclusion of third-party merchants or apps, must be efficiently motivated. Okay? So the idea, actually there is a grain of truth in that, and I'm very critical of it, but it's actually a very important step to understand what's going to happen. There is a grain of truth in that if you're a platform and you have a very lively, vibrant market, apps market or merchant markets, actually that's going to make the consumer better off. You'll get lower price for the apps and merchants, and you'll get more diversity. So as a consumer, you like to have a rich ecosystem. And therefore, the platform can charge more to the consumers because the platform is in relationship with both sides, and that's very important to understand. It's in a relationship with both sides, and it can really, benefit from that. Okay, and there's a grain of truth in there. The problem with that, I'm going to keep this diagram so that you just remember this diagram. Okay, so why is the Chicago School possibly wrong? I mean, it's very appealing to start with. You know, if you offer a better ecosystem by having more competition in the ecosystem, then you can charge the consumer for the increased surplus. And therefore, the platform benefits from having competition in the complementary segment. That's the Chicago School. And there are a couple of reasons why it's wrong. We already saw a couple of ones, which have to do with the contestability of the core segment. So, for example, depriving a future entrant in the core segment from the access to third-party apps, because those third-party apps will have gone bankrupt, may actually help entry in the core segment, prevent entry in the core segment. And I also mentioned the preemptive merger issue. I'm going to focus more on the fairness issues. And I told you, the Chicago School, a rich ecosystem allows you to raise price on the core service. But to raise price, to be able to raise price is one thing. The question is, do you want to raise it? And here there is something very specific and very new to two-sided platform, the digital platform, which is that I'm going to argue that many prices are equal to zero. And if they are equal to zero, that means that your opportunity cost is negative. And you would like to charge a negative price, in principle. So, that may look strange for an economics student. Negative cost, what is that? But remember your courses and the notion of opportunity cost. I told you you are paying zero for wonderful services. You don't pay when you go on Amazon. You don't pay for Google. You don't pay for many, many things. Why is that? Is that because those platforms will make a lot of money on the other side? And they want to attract you. Because once they have you, then they can go and see the advertisers and have unique customers and can tell you who you can reach who will be interested in that product. They can tell the merchant, Booking can tell the merchant, look, the hotel have those unique customers, and if you don't pay me 20%, then you won't be able to reach those customers. I am the gateway, the gatekeeper for those consumers. And therefore, actually Google and Booking and all those platforms will be willing to pay to have you. So their optimal price is negative on the consumer side. Okay? But wait, can they charge a negative price? And the answer is no. The answer is no because, and they've tried at some point, but they can't. They can't because then there will be bots basically pretending to be consumers and actually cashing in on those negative prices. Those robots will actually be arbitraging the situation. You cannot charge negative prices. And by the way, those will be not true customers. You're of interest to advertisers, you're of interest to merchants, because they will sell you stuff. But the bots are of no interest to advertisers and of no interest to merchants because they are not real customers. So this is a long discussion, but it shows that actually all those platforms would like to charge you negative prices, but they can't. That's why they charge you exactly zero. They charge you as close as possible while still preventing the arbitrage. But this is important because if you think that the optimal price is a negative price, I don't know for you, I should change the side. But basically, if you think that the optimal price is a negative price, then you don't want to increase the price above zero. Actually, it's the reverse. You like to go in the opposite direction. And you see that the Chicago School argument doesn't hold anymore because you may not want to increase the price to the consumer. Your price is already too high. At zero, it's already too high. You like to subsidize the consumer. Okay, that's the first thing. That's the zero lower bound prime. Not the zero lower bound that you have learned in macroeconomics, but the zero lower bound for industrial organization, which is that you cannot charge below zero. That's the first issue. The second issue has to do with the second zero lower bound. That's a bit more, even more subtle, but it's important as well, which is that those apps, especially apps more than merchants, but those apps actually might want to charge negative price themselves because they are also platforms themselves. And they may use their knowledge of the consumers to sell advertising on their own apps. Okay? They may actually subcontract business to third-party merchants, and they will get commissions from that. So themselves, they often actually charge a zero price. And that's a second zero lower bound, which we call the app zero lower bound, as opposed to the platform zero lower bound or the core zero lower bound, which prevents you from charging negative prices to consumers. Okay? So I cannot resist. Ooh, 5 minutes. Okay, so you'll never know about most favored nation clause, which is something is very, very interesting. Why we are intervening about those best price guarantees. It's really when you feel good to be an economist, because your first intuition is a wrong one. Mine was a wrong one, of course. Your first thing, it's a wonderful deal when those platforms offer you the best price. You cannot find a better price ever, and then you think a little bit about it, and you see that it backfires against the consumers. So that's actually a good thing. And this is very important policy area. Actually, our own president, Emmanuel Macron, when he was finance minister, actually had some ruling on this particular issue. This is a very concrete issue. So if you are interested, I can tell you a bit more about this. And so let me just mention a few things about one of the big issues we are studying is whether the commission fees, the fees which are charged to the merchants, are actually reasonable. So is the Apple or Google store charging 30%? Is that reasonable? Is Booking charging 20%? Is that reasonable? Actually, the first time in Toulouse we studied this was on payment cards. I'm sorry, it's not very readable. I just use an old slide. But the payment cards, the payment cards are charging about 2-3% to the merchant. You don't pay as a consumer, but the merchant is going to pay 2 or 3%. It's small, but on lots of transactions, it actually can be quite big. And there have been many antitrust cases about that. And but at the same time, those platforms have a business model. And actually, much of the work on two-sided markets is to understand those business models and how they matter. But if you want to regulate those 2 or 3%, you have to find a number. And that's not very easy. And what is the commission fee that you have to pay? So basically, with Jean-Charles Rochet, actually it's a much older paper, but it was published in 2011, we actually designed a rule which basically says, it should be like this, okay? So basically, in a nutshell, the idea was that you cannot charge to the merchant more than the convenience benefit of the merchant. So in that particular case, the benefit that the merchant derive from accepting payment cards. There are lots of benefits, transaction benefits, but you try to compute them. So empirically, it's actually difficult, but from a theoretical point of view, this rule that the merchant discount should be less than merchant convenience benefit is actually one way of thinking about this thing. And actually, it has become the rule for the European Union, and it's going to be the rule for Brazil, and it's actually something that. But we wanted to see more generally what's doing. This is work in progress, by the way. The paper will be ready in December, and I apologize, it should be on my website. It's not on my website. It's joint work done with a PhD student, an Italian PhD student at TSC, Michele Bisceglia, but using the same kind of simplified model. By the way, sorry, Professor Gorsh is going to be a bit nervous about the timing, but I'm a monopolist here. I have the monopoly to the microphone unless you take me away. And let me just go on for a couple of more minutes, and I apologize for being late. Just to advertise, in a sense. So next month you'll be able to find the paper. But by the way, you already know that as students. Maybe less so if you're a master's student or an undergraduate. But in economics, you write down a very simplified model. You try to capture reality, and then you test the robustness by making it more complicated, and you test it. We are not at all at the stage of testing it, but you try to do this process. So let me I'm just going to give you some. I prepared way too many slides. I talk too much, I'm afraid. So we wonder what kind of price you can charge, the access price can be charged by the platform. So I'm going to call A the access charge. B will be the benefit that an application or a merchant will have from having a customer. That could be a benefit from having the data of the consumer. That might be a benefit from having repeat purchases from the consumer. That might be a benefit from the app being itself a platform and connecting to others. So B will be the benefit, so it has many different interpretations. And the first thing is that if you have an access charge which is less than B, you show that then there is a very strong incentive to engage in non-price foreclosure. So non-price foreclosure in the digital economy is very simple. It's not only the wrong APIs. It's also, if you think about Google or Amazon making a recommendation, if you are not top listed, you are not going to sell anything, right? So it's very easy for a digital platform actually to discriminate against third-party apps or merchants, okay? And either you invest a lot into the regulatory process to actually control this, or you are going to get non-price foreclosure because the platform doesn't have enough skin in the game in order to give access to rivals. And in that case, you can show that the app zero lower bound, I'm going very quickly through this table, the app zero lower bound is binding, which is you are in a region in which the price charged by the apps is going to be zero. Then you have a region when you raise a little bit the access price in which you have competitive neutrality, which means that the Chicago School rich ecosystem argument actually holds. So I'm very critical of the Chicago School argument, but there are regions where actually it's correct. And in that case, you get basically, let me ignore IFCPAR, which is called the Baumol-Willig rule, which has been learned by the judges for a long time and was applied to in a very different context. But you have a fair reward of the third-party apps, we are going to be interested in cases where the third-party app is more efficient than, is better, a better product than the in-house app. That's an interesting case. And you'll get a fair reward for the third-party app. And then the access charge in that range will be actually neutral, which may seem a bit weird to you because you might think if you increase the access charge, it is bad for the third-party app. But you have to think in terms of opportunity cost, because if you have a higher access charge, you also increase the opportunity cost of the platform because it's going to lose the profit on the access. Then you have a region, so theta is actually the usefulness for the consumer of the app. So when you reach B plus theta, then you are in a region when you have a squeeze, where you start squeezing the superior third-party app and you reduce its profit margin, which means that there will be little incentive to innovate in those third-party apps. And then if the access charge is way too high, you get price foreclosure. So that really gives you some kind of relatively intuitive pattern. And we are not at this stage, but we will discuss in the paper ways this is very abstract, so ways in which you can implement that in practice. And then hopefully, we economists are about increasing the toolbox. We want to offer to the policy. We are no policy makers. And what we can do is really increase the size of the toolbox so as to offer solutions. And now one of the big issues is really about what we do with the big tech companies, okay? And that's very important to actually, that not only us, but you also, you innovate and you are creative about what we can do. And that's true for industrial organization, that's true for any field. The digital revolution and AI, of course, offer new challenges. And it's not only I/O, of course, it's health, it's labor. I work, and my colleagues work a lot on privacy. It's a huge field now. It has to be dealt with. It has a big impact on politics, of course. And, I don't think the tech giants' dominance has to confront us with an unpalatable choice between laissez-faire. Economics is not about laissez-faire. But we don't want populist interventions either. We want some kind of smart regulation. I know that smart regulation is not very popular among populists, but that's part of it. And they must be designed to tame the tech giants without jeopardizing their innovation. So we have to preserve the innovation. And a little bit of advertising, I apologize. But thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Tirole. So the lecture was indeed very engrossing and insightful. And I'm sure the students must have many questions to ask him. So can I invite some question from the students? Can you hand over the mic to some students?
My name is Khushi. So my question is that sometimes tech giants are overvalued due to the unpredictability of the income stream and the potential revenue stream in the future. So should there be any specific regulation in this regard?
Should I take more questions and then? Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your questions. The values are actually pretty high, also they fluctuate a lot, as you say. I mean, just look at Facebook, for example. They fluctuate a lot because most of the value is in the future, in a sense. They spend a lot of money, sometimes 18, 20 years or 10 years at least, to actually, they lose money and then make a lot of money once they have an entrenched position. And one of the ways actually of measuring whether there are big profits is just looking at the market value. You see firms which make zero profit, which are worth tens of billions of dollars. There is something there. That means that the market bets actually on those firms with a lot of uncertainty. Now, whether we should regulate that is I think it's more difficult, as opposed, of course, to other regulation like income redistribution. Of course, that's different. I mean, when you can just for fun buy Twitter for $44 billion because you feel like influencing politics, I'm being nasty. I mean, that's an issue, right? But in terms of value, it's very hard. I mean, you have those firms. There are good reasons why they are natural monopoly. I mean, it's not like you would expect vibrant competition. The best you can expect is some form of contestability or maybe multi-homing, the way we have with iOS and Android. If you have multi-homing, you can have 2, you can have 3 platforms. There are a couple of segments where you have 3 or 4 platforms, but mostly you're going to get 1 or 2, and they will be incredibly valuable. And you might be saying, okay, this is a price you have to pay for innovation. We have been debating this exact issue. I'm part of the Deaton Commission on inequalities, with an S, because there are lots of different forms of inequality. And, there are people like John von Reenen who have been very instrumental in documenting the very high markups, by the way, not only in the tech industries, but more generally. And the question is, are there excessive profits? And the answer is we don't quite know, because you have to look at all the money which has been spent by not only by Google, but also by many other firms to be the next Facebook or the next Google and so on. So we don't quite know, honestly. I'd much rather, I'm more a micro, I do macro as well, but I'm more a microeconomist. And my view is that it's better to intervene with antitrust and see if those dominant platforms will be abusing their dominant position. Regulating their value is very difficult, and if we are worried about inequalities, then we use income redistribution, which is not easy again, because those people are highly mobile and they can always start their business somewhere else. But in the end, we could do more on those 2 dimensions. And I think Europe is actually taking the lead, which is good, just the way it did with GDPR, the privacy regulation. I'm very critical, by the way, of GDPR, but I think it's wonderful because, at least we start tackling those issues. And I think Europe has been a bit of a little advertising for Europe, for those of you who want to come and study there. It has taken a lead in those areas, and that's important.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question was that, as we know, there are 2 parts to the business that Amazon has. So one would be the marketplace that they have, and the second would be their own products, like you were mentioning, Amazon Basics, where in Amazon Basics they have the in the marketplace they have the information of all the vendors who sell their products online. But there's an asymmetry of information there, because the vendors don't have information on what the future trends would be, but Amazon is very perceptive in predicting those trends and also has information regarding what products are doing well on its platform. So how do we get over this information asymmetry that Amazon has?
Thank you. That's another excellent question. Yes, you're right. Amazon is both a platform and also a competitor on that platform through Amazon Basics in particular, and has a big competitive advantage that you summarize with the vendors. not having the information that Amazon has, but Amazon has information about the vendor's business and so on, so has all the data, and therefore has a competitive advantage and can possibly replace this, which is a little bit like the foreclosure thing that I discussed, but for another reason. It's not because you are denying access to the platform, but because you are using the knowledge that you have plus the knowledge that they have in order to have a better product. And also you know exactly what works and doesn't work, what's becoming popular and what's not popular. So it's a big issue. In Europe, there is this new regulation which there could be useful so that you'll not be able to use data. So the platform could not use data from the third-party apps in order to create a rival product, for example. Now, how is this going to be done? I don't have a clue. So let me add this caveat to the open regulation. Margaret Vestager, with the commissioner, knows that pretty well, and we still have to work out how we implement those rules, and that's where we need a lot of creativity as well. But you're completely right, and I realize I kind of remember that India has some rules also about third-party apps, and that there was a little bit of protectionism there as well, but there was also some rules about unfair competition, which probably were right. And you correct me if I'm wrong. Well, Professor Ghosh is a professor in this industrial organization, and she could tell me, but yeah, this is all in the making. You will think that we know everything about industrial organization. I certainly don't, and I wish I had a clear answer to your question. But at least people are aware of this fact, and we are trying to remedy that.
So we have a question from there. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Ashish Pandey from the MBA program. My question is also related to data privacy. So various countries have came up with data regulations, like UK came up with GDPR, India is also set to have the data protection law soon. And one of the provisions that the countries want is data localization, like saving the data and processing it in the same country. So do you think that it would be, because of the cloud technologies is difficult for data localization, do you think that it will increase the operational cost and curtailing the innovation, or do you think that we can make it happen?
That's a good question, but a very broad question. The GDPR is trying to protect the consumer, the citizens. Also, it doesn't change behavior that much. I mean, I see how I behave. I want to know something fast. I go to the web many times a day, and I want to do it fast. And and then I have a register of things that I have to answer, what kind of things. I don't even know what the partners are. I don't know what their exact policies are, and so on. I mean, it's very hard for the consumer. I think we have to standardize this much more than we do now. But that you have to be much more interventionist to do it, so that we really protect the consumer. I'm a bit impulsive, so I click all the time. It's not only impulsiveness, it's just that it will take too much time to relearn what the exact policy and the consequences of my accepting certain things. It will be just too difficult. So we need to protect the consumers better. And we in economics, as you know, we work more and more on issues having to do with privacy, both for what we call pro-social behavior, so some kind of behaviors that everybody will agree upon. Everybody agrees that polluting is not nice, or committing a crime is not nice. And also for divisive behavior, which are the behavior on which some people disagree on what's right and wrong. So I'm thinking about politics, sexuality, religion, social roles, and abortion, and all. I mean, you name it, where you can create conflicts among people. In the end, it's going to depend on the courts, I would think, the court enforcement. That's where democracies will have a big advantage over autocracies. If you have very independent court system, then those court systems can actually protect citizens against intrusion of the rulers, the political rulers in the country. And that's going to be very important. And I've written papers, including one last year in the American Economic Review on the Chinese social rating system. That paper, the paper on digital dystopia and how it could work from a theoretical perspective and how it's going to be put into use probably. If you don't have an independent Supreme Court, which for example says you are not allowed to go into divisive issues, those are something which are very dangerous from a social point of view, from a political point of view, then that's going to be difficult. You are talking about geolocalization, which is a wonderful invention. I mean, lots of, you don't want to get ads about, a pizza place in Mumbai. I mean, you don't care about it. Tonight you want to have a pizza in Delhi, of course, and all kinds of things like this. It's very important to have the geolocalization for many things, but at the same time that allows platforms and governments actually to know exactly where you are and exactly what you do. That's a broader issue in terms of protection of privacy, is that now those platforms know everything about you, sometimes even more than you do. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous because of various issues with the private sector, but also governments may have access to those data, and then that's very dangerous for the protection of the privacy of people. And I just see only one remedy is really a rule of law where you have the courts, and including the Supreme Courts, actually saying, no, you're not allowed to do that. This is not something which is allowable. So, we have to, what I'm saying is that a huge opportunity for all of you to do research and policy on how we can actually protect privacy without killing innovation again. Those things can be incredibly useful at the same time. I would say most of the tech innovations are fabulous. At the same time, they're also extremely dangerous. So how do we deal with that? And we need bright minds actually to design those new regulations and think about how you want to do it. But you still need them to be implemented. However good or bad they are, you need them to be implemented, and then you need an independent court system for that.
So Professor Pant, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, two questions actually, since don't seem to be any more students asking questions.
You are the Vice Chancellor.
No, that's true. The first is in the context of what you mentioned about platforms having knowledge of the consumers, in the sense they have a ready market, and so they can make money from the advertisers who don't know about the consumers, and they would be actually happy to offer negative price to stay there, right? Of course, they can't charge negative price for lots of reasons we know. Is that why many platforms decide to sell on discounts? Reason why I ask that is, in India we don't allow it. We don't allow platforms to offer discounting on prices. So we believe that to consumers. We don't allow them discounting because we think that's an unfair practice. And that's how they're keeping out the competition. Now that's a tricky question. So that's one question which I want to ask. The other was in the area of competition policy. Now I have done some work with the Indian Competition Commission. The big issue here is merger and acquisitions. Now a merger and acquisition has to be notified beyond a certain level, of course. But within 90 days, the authorities have to decide whether the M&A is a dominant or anti-competitive or not. And the problem really is, till they've actually intervened in the market, how do you know if it's going to be dominant or not? Because dominance is always related to either market control or price control. And one of the things we decided to use was, if the if the acquirer or the one who acquires is the one who is the higher cost producer, and the acquired firm is the lowest cost producer, and the acquired firm is a high cost producer, then we say, okay, then you should go ahead because it's efficiency creating. Now that's one possible way of saying ex ante, because that's the problem. In an M&A, you've got an ex ante decision. You can't say, let them work and then I'll decide, because you cannot take it back. Now, these are two issues which are really a big problem in such kind of areas. Just your views on these two.
Well, thank you, Professor Pant. Just an aside on negative prices. So I said negative prices are infeasible. There are exceptions. Actually, often you pay negative, with your payment cards, you may actually pay a negative price. So you may get frequent flyer miles or cashback bonuses. And that's one of the extremely rare examples in economics of a negative price. And the reason for that is that arbitrage is not possible, because on the other side, the merchant is actually, you're buying a good from the merchant, so actually there is no possible arbitrage there. The platform gets 3% on the other side anyway. So it can offer 1 or 2% or something like that as an incentive to use a card. So that was just a digression. In general, negative prices are impossible. On the issue of discount, this is very difficult. So I will have to look more precisely into the kind of situation you have in mind. That can be unfair. That can be fine. You know, the issue of price discrimination is actually a very complicated one, as you yourself know pretty well. So let me maybe keep that for a private discussion, because I will have to know more about it. Merchants, M&As. This is difficult, as I mentioned, because in the two-sided platform side, the kind of argument you give may be a little bit less relevant than for other types of M&As. For one thing, the marginal costs are mostly zero. So, you know, having costs, you know, firms with different costs, they have different fixed costs somehow, or investment costs, but you know, the marginal cost often is the same. It's zero for digital goods. And when you say that acquirer is the one, when the acquirer is the one with the lowest cost and the acquiree is the one with the highest cost, there could still be efficiency gains, because you could still have actually an improvement in the operation of the acquiree. And that's always difficult. That's something that competition authorities are always struggling with somehow, and you know that too well. And it's a difficult issue. You have to compare the efficiency gains with the anti-competitive loss, possibly. Now, again, for digital platforms, those costs are zero, so you know it's not very relevant. But for other industries, it really is. Thank you.
We have time for just one more question. Yeah.
Hello, Professor. I'm Ritika. My question to you is, how to regulate the different types of data being collected by the internet giants, where they have stakes in different sectors, for instance, the finance sector, where they can use the data to their advantage?
So the question is about the data which are being used by the platforms.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a good question, and I'm afraid I don't have the answer. I mentioned earlier that you know, you want those platforms to be efficient, and therefore they should be combining data, and that raises two issues. One I'm not going to talk about, which is de-anonymization of data. So when you start combining data sets, even so each guarantees anonymity or rough anonymity of the person, you know, if you combine them, you know, one will give you the address, the other one, and you know, you can very easily know who it is. So that's, it's no longer anonymous, and that's an issue. So computer scientists are trying to work. I'm not an expert, They try to work by introducing noise and all those things, But that's for computer scientists and mathematicians. That's one aspect. But then there's the issue of dominance. And it's true that, and there was an earlier question on Amazon, once you start combining data, you get stronger and stronger. And if you're already dominant, that means that it's going to be very hard for the others to compete. So again, you have this balance between efficiency, where you like them to be able to combine data, and antitrust, where you want to fight dominance. And that again, and if there's a lesson to this talk, is that you represent the future of regulation, and you have to be creative and try to find solutions for those very difficult issues.
Okay, so I can see many more hands raised, but we are short of time, so we can the students can have more questions while having some tea with Professor Tirole. But before we proceed for a tea, may I invite Professor Jaideep Mukherjee, who is the head of the Economics Division, IIFT Delhi, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Very good morning. On behalf of all students, faculty colleagues, and the staff members, it gives me immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks. Sir, we are extremely delightful and thankful to host Professor Joe Tirole, the Nobel Laureate in Economic Sciences. We are extremely thankful that Professor Tirole has accepted our invitation and being here with us today. One of the greatest economic theorists, Professor Tirole's lecture has contributed to the understanding of the market structure, the digital ecosystems in particular, the complementarity between natural monopoly and competitive segments, important concepts that Professor Tirole has raised, in particular, the contestability, the defensive mergers, fairness, and the important issue of regulation of digital platforms. Your thoughts have greatly inspired us, and in particular, our students. I would like to express sincere thanks to Professor Manoj Pant, our Vice Chancellor, himself a noted trade economist, for designing and conceptualizing the entire program schedule. Special thanks to the senior officials from the Embassy of France in India, the Department of Science and Technology, and in particular Professor Nitin Sheth, Director CEFIPRA, for facilitating Professor Tirole's visit to India and providing all guidance in organizing today's public lecture. We would like to express our sincere thanks to all the noted economists and researchers from renowned universities and institutions in and around Delhi who are present here for taking their time out and in spite of their busy schedule and attending today's lecture. Special thanks to all my faculty colleagues and dear students from IIFT Delhi, Kolkata and Kakinada campus for your gracious presence. Last but not the least, today's event would not have been successfully executed without the active administrative and logistic support provided by the registrar, Dr. P.K. Gupta, and the entire administrative staff and the computer center. So thanks to you all.
Long live India and France friendship.